Hello, world, and welcome to the first episode of Blockchain and the World Economy. I'm your host, Satoshi Chris, and for this series of podcasts, we're going to be talking about blockchain and, you guessed it, the world economy. The reason I wanted to start this series is because I wanted to create content talking about blockchain and the world of business for quite a long time. Um, but I wasn't sure what sort of angle I wanted to portray. I didn't know if I wanted to just bring general news or bring more of a financial point of view into the world of blockchain. But actually, this last weekend, I was reading a few articles, and something really, really interesting came by, and that was I started reading about economics of video games and how some video games suffer from inflation, and basically the players playing these games lose a lot of money because of inflation. So that seemed really, really interesting to me because that happens in real world economies in countries. So it's fascinating to me that these sort of mistakes can also happen um, in virtual worlds and real worlds, real economies. So if you like this content, please like this video, subscribe to this channel. I'm also going to show my Twitter account. That's where I post most of my thoughts, information. If you like this sort of content, please follow me on Twitter. And and yeah, let's jump right in. So, as I said, I was reading very interesting articles this weekend. So I decided to, create this series of content on the things that I like. So this is of course the first episode, but hopefully it's gonna evolve in this sort of interesting subjects. So yeah, what was very fascinating to me is that games have evolved quite a lot since video games were created, especially since internet came by. Because I remember when I was young, I used to play countless hours of Nintendo and PS2. I remember when GTA, when Grand Theft Auto came around. I was quite amazed. I think, on up to today's date, I think it's one of my favorite games. Um, GTA 5, but the whole series is just amazing. But yeah, after after internet came by, many players started engaging in what it's called MMOs, or massively multiplayer online platforms. Um, and they started creating their own avatars. They used to spend a lot of money in these sites, and it's quite funny because if you ask a person if this money is real or not, they, I guess most times they will say that it's not a real form of money. But if you ask them if their characters are real and their experiences are real, for them, for people that play these games, it's um, it's insanely real, and people value their avatars, and they value the progress that they have in a game even much more than in real life. And I feel, even though I don't play many online multiplayer platforms, I do play a lot of video games, and I used to play a lot of video games, and I really have a lot of respect for this industry because um, it's a really fun way to spend your time, really. Um, but what I wanted to talk about is basically how people value money and how people perceive value. Because I think I didn't add this to the article, but when I was doing the research, um, I was reading about this overweight woman that was playing that she had two kids. I think she lived alone, and she had two young children. She started playing this game. I think it was Second Life or something. And inside that game, she wasn't overweight. She didn't have the problems that she had in real life. So she became addicted to it, and basically her real world was not the physical world, but it was actually the online virtual world. So that's quite fascinating to me as well, because with seeing how the internet is going, seeing how video games are becoming more and more realistic over time, you can't think about you can't stop thinking about Elon Musk and his predictions about living in a simulation. But I don't want to go to that subject yet. I wanted to keep it on the financial sort of, economic um, point of view. But where I was going with this story of the lady is that she became so addicted to her online multiplayer game that she forgot about her children, and the police came to her house and took her children away from her because the children were not eating, they weren't going to school. She became obsessed with the game. I'm almost sure um, she went to prison for some time. uh, but again, it makes you think about how people again perceive value in this sort of games. And even uh, more about this problem is that people face real economic issues in these games as well. Um, some games suffer from inflation, in where many players will come to they will play the game, they will maybe leave it for a few weeks or so, and when they come back to see their account, check their progress and everything, they see that basically all their money um, is worthless. They have the same quantity of money, uh, but their money can't buy them anything. So this had happened in other parts of the world, like Zimbabwe or Venezuela, which is the country where I'm from. It was literally like that. You could, take one bill of local currency, save it in a drawer or something for a month, and when you take it out, you could maybe that same bill will buy you half of the things that you could buy at the beginning of the month, or maybe less. So yeah, again, it became really fascinating to me that you can find this sort of same behavior in video games. So actually, I have two examples from the game Diablo 2 and Asheron's Call, that basically the in-game currency became so inflated that players started to use shards as a form of money. And shards are this. Let me see if I can find it. Shards, Asheron's Call. Ah, let me see if they can find it this way. Yeah. So this these crystals are what people were using to pay each other for commodities, so for in game resources and objects. And they abandoned the local currency of the game because it didn't have any value. um, Same with Diablo 2, Gaia Online. I was reading about these games. I actually have an article here, um, where they talk about how people were pretty upset because they were literally losing all their money. And for maybe for a game, you might say, well, it's just a game. But for some people, it's not just a game, it's a lot of time and effort that people put into this, into these virtual worlds. And you don't really want to you know mess with the hard work of people, not even in a virtual world, not in the real world. Um, but it actually made me think about how people throughout time had always had this problem of inflation and how to perceive value and what do people use to pay each other. So, um, so yeah, this is one of the articles I use. I was also reading this article on how Engine is helping to solve inflation in virtual economies. Because it wasn't to my knowledge, but it's a real world, a real virtual world problem, as well as the as well as in the real world. And the reason that this happens in both the virtual world and the real world is basically because there's unlimited supply of new money being created. Um, and that's why I find it so fascinating, because if you think about today's economy, today's 20th of October, uh, in the year 2020, um, basically we're in a recession caused by the coronavirus, um, lockdowns, and basically everything turning more digital. A lot of brick and mortar businesses are going bust. But I think that was gonna happen anyways. I think that what Corona did was just, make everything happen so much quick. But I think regardless of Corona or not, I'm pretty sure that that was going to happen in the future anyways. But the real problem with that I read in these articles is that people, when people join the game, there are certain ways for you to make money. Uh, One of those ways is to kill or to defeat certain creatures that they give resources, or they give a form of gold, which is most of the time the in-game currency. Um, but what ends up happening is that a lot of people join the game, and as many people join the game, there's this amount of money also being put into this virtual economy. And what ends up happening is that basically the real assets that are much more scarce, that people still need to play around the game, they become really really expensive. And it's not actually things becoming expensive. It's just inflation that is killing everyone everyone else purchasing power. So without going too deep on the like currency um, status of the like reserve currency, you start noticing that throughout the history of the world, reserve, there's always been a sorry about that. So there's always been a change in the world's reserve currency. And why that happens? Basically because once a country has the let's say the ability to print more money, uh, most times they will, because printing money is not the best solution sometimes, but it's definitely the most quickest solution, and the one that people will not perceive it in the short term, but they will in the long term. That's what I tell people when they ask me, their salaries are not going up, but houses are. Why are so many billionaires in the world? And I mean, there's obviously more than one reason to explain that anomaly, but it's basically because of inflation. I wanted to pull out this image. Um, Let me see if I can find it. But yeah, if you see this image, you see that for some time Portugal had the reserve currency of the world during the year between 1400 and 1500, then Spain, then the Netherlands, then France, UK, Britain, and finally up until this date, the US and the dollar hold the world's reserve currency status. We start reading about um, the big booms and busts of these countries and why they had basically why did they have the most valuable currency and what they lost that valuable status is because they abused power, they couldn't pay people, and basically when they go bust, people find other ways um, to hold their currency. For quite some time, that currency was gold, was backed by gold, up until in the year 1970s. I don't know which year it is. I think it's 77, but let me just find it very quick. Gold standard, US dollar. I'm sure it was on the under Nixon, under Richard Nixon. It was 71. So yeah, up until that time, dollars were backed by gold, and you could go every country with dollars. They could go to the U.S. and ask for their bills cashed in, and they will receive gold. And that ended in the 1970s with Richard Nixon abandoning basically the gold standard. And what happened, that was called the Bretton Woods Agreement. And what happened from 1970 up until today, there's been a massive influx of new money being created. And what has done is that many people are losing purchasing power. If you don't invest, if you only save your money on like a savings account or something, you get taxed a 2% inflation rate, more or less, if you're living in the US or if you're living in a first world country or a first world economy. You get taxed around, and I say tax because that's money being printed by the government to spend on the country, but that's money that ends up being it ends up being a cost for someone. And if you don't invest that money, if you save it in a bank account, that you're basically losing money, and that's being taken away from you by the government. And I don't want to go too deep in the libertarian narrative about governments and stuff. I'm just saying facts. If you leave your money on a savings account and there's inflation, regardless of the percentage, you're gonna have less money or less valuable, or how do I say it? Yeah, your money's gonna be worth less in a year that it is worth now. $1,000 today is much more than $1,000 in 1 year, in 2 years. So maybe you say, oh, 2% is nothing. I could be, I don't care about that 2%. And that, that's true, but that also adds to the compounding effect. So 2% every year for, let's say, the last 50 years had made the dollar basically worthless compared to what it was worth in the 1970s. I'm gonna pull up a chart here where I look at the price of gold in the 1970s, and I look the price of silver in the 1970s as well. So for some of you that don't know, the price of silver today is 24.5. But many years ago, before the abandonment of the gold standard, $1 was worth 1 gram of silver. Let me see if if it's exactly 1 gram of silver. Or should be an ounce. Price per ounce. Yeah. So the price per ounce today is $24. Um, but in the 1970s it was $1. So if you do your calculations, you see that the dollar has collapsed in value pretty much since the abandonment of the gold standard. And the reason is uh, there's too much money being printed. There's too much supply of money being put out there. So that makes everybody's purchasing power go low. That is consistently with gold as well, and basically any real asset, real estate, companies, anything that has a real intrinsic value has gone up in price. But not only has gone up in price, it has inflated because the dollar has been losing a lot of value. So um, let me close this window. So yeah, I think I went maybe too far from what the main idea was. But yeah, that's basically the idea that I wanted to put forward. If you have an unlimited supply of money, there's gonna be inflation, and for quite some time, first world economies have been targeting a 2% inflation rate, which again is only for first world economies, because in the rest of the world, like for example in South America, which I have more knowledge, you can get a the inflation rate of maybe 10% or 20% as something really low, as something that most governments try to aim for. So when you see about when you think about the um, when you think about the power that governments have with your money, it's just insane. Because if you don't have an education on finance, if you don't know how assets work and how money works, you're probably just gonna save up your money because maybe you're too afraid to invest it on a stock exchange or invest it or put it on cryptocurrencies or something like that. And what ends up happening is that over a period of 10 years or so, um, you're technically losing money if you can't keep up with the inflation rate. If you're not investing in an asset that can keep up with the inflation rate, um, you're technically losing money. And even though even if you're investing in assets that are producing a yield, a yearly return, or a yield, if you're investing in fixed income instruments, you have to subtract the interest rate that you're receiving by the you have to take out basically the inflation rate and your returns, because that will be the real return that you're making. If you're making 5% on a bond and the inflation rate is 2%, your real return is 3%. So I guess that's what I want to talk about on this series. How inflation is basically killing the savings of millions and millions of people. Some people are blaming the government, some people are blaming capitalism, some people are blaming corporations. But in reality, at least in my opinion, the real problem is how central banks are managing my money, your money, everybody's money. Um, I would say I would give out maybe some tips on how to invest your money, but I don't want to go there yet. I want to basically educate people on what the reasons are for this phenomena, and make people think by their own as well. And that's pretty much I guess what I wanted to say in this episode. We're 25 minutes in. And yeah, let me think about something to close this first episode. Um, well, to close down this episode, I would say that some central banks, the Fed and the European Central Bank, have said in the last couple of weeks that they might be targeting a higher interest rate than just 2%. So if that happens and the world starts to go into a hyperinflated scenario, like it happened already in economies like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, um, I think that possibly could happen to fiat currencies such as the dollar, the euro. Although I think that the dollar could be one of the last currencies in being hyperinflated, just because uh just because it's the world's currency, world's reserve currency. I think it's gonna happen first with other much much weaker currencies, and then it will escalate up until the point where we need to have another world's currency, or a gold standard, or a Bitcoin standard. But I think that's maybe a bit unlikely. I think I like blockchain, I like Bitcoin, I like crypto, but realistically, I would think that we might go first to a gold standard than a Bitcoin standard. Uh, but yeah, those are my that's my thinking. That's my first episode and article. Again, if you like this sort of content, please hit a like. Follow me on my social media accounts. Read my newsletter. Let me know what you think. And I want to keep making this content for you guys. So your feedback is pretty appreciated. If you think the content is too long, please let me know. If you want me to go more in depth on certain subjects, please let me know. And I'll see you on the next episode. Peace.